Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Andrew DeYoung, author of The Temps, published by Keylight, an imprint of Turner Publishing, and released on March 28th. Andrew's debut novel was The Exo Project, another book dealing with a ravaged Earth and the hopes and attempts at creating a new society. And The Temps continues with Andrew's optimistic take on our imperiled planet, but from a different perspective. The idea that a certain kind of destruction may lead to a renewal, a phoenix-like arrival of a new world, one in which order and reason are the hallmarks of a civilization where the good side of our species governs that civilization. So we meet Jacob, Lauren, Swati, and Dominic, all temps, temporary employees at Delphi, a corporation that does everything, but no one knows what that everything is. But who controls that everything is this guy, Tristram Brandt, an elusive CEO who is never seen, but perhaps on one day unveils himself, but not to the temps. They don't have the right badges. And it's from there that the book begins to take us to a place where things take a turn for the worse, the much worse. So welcome, Andrew, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
So normally I start talking and blabbing and don't let the interviewee talk, but I can't blab today because there's so many spoilers that I don't want to give any away. So contrary to my usual interviewing style, which is me talking, like I said, why don't you go ahead and give us the story of the book? Then I'll know how far I can go without spoiling. It'll give me kind of a compass.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at least what happens in the first chapter is something that can be spoiled, which you mentioned that, the four main characters are all temp workers. The regular employees, the full-time employees, are called to a special meeting, an all-company meeting outside in an outdoor amphitheater. It's sort of a big, like Google-sized type of company. And a sort of gas attack happens while they're outside, one that leaves the temp stranded inside, but kills all of the regular employees. So for a time, at least, it seems, and I won't reveal, what is really the case, but it certainly seems as though these temp workers who are stuck in the office of the company that employed them might be the only survivors, at least of the company, if not in some ways in the entire world. And they are, responsible for surviving, finding food and water, but then they also start having to think about the kind of world that they want to build, confined world in the office complex, but maybe once the gas lifts, they can go outside. What kind of world they want to build now that all the regular employees, most of whom are older, are gone. So this is sort of a society of young people, of people in their 20s, kind of deciding what world they want to make, what community they want to make together, now that at least the corporate authority figures are gone.
Well, before we get into the characters and the plot, and you've talked about this in some of your interviews, but apocalypse is a word that's bandied about quite a bit: dystopian, catastrophic, end of the world. There's tons and tons of books. I own this bookshop, Wellington Square Bookshop, and the front table is awash with books that deal with the end of the world. And there's got to be a reason why people are preoccupied with it. But you have a different take kind of on what most people think of as an apocalypse. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and certainly I understand people's preoccupation with the end of the world. There's a reason that I wrote an end of the world novel. It's that we keep imagining the end of the world. And it is something that, sometimes you look at the news and it seems plausible, or you think about the various problems we face, like global warming, and you just have to think about the end of the world. But one of the things that I reveal in the book, which is true, and it's just something that I find interesting, is that apocalypse doesn't actually mean the end of the world in its sort of original meaning. The sort of Greek roots of the of the word indicate a sort of revelation or an unveiling. So it's an event that presents us with information about what the world is going to become. So I think that this is interesting in part because I think that we've had apocalypses before. When Russia invaded Ukraine, people on the news said the world is different now. And that was kind of a way of saying that there had been an apocalypse. Vladimir Putin's actions toward Ukraine revealed something to us that we didn't know before, and now the world was different. One world ended, and now we're living in a different world. That happens all the time. That's something that's scary because it means that apocalypses do happen, big events that reveal something about what the world is becoming. But there's also some sort of encouragement in it because it means encouragement and responsibility, because it means that, global warming, the things that we fear about, it's going to end the world. It's not going to end the world. It's going to reveal a new world. But we have a responsibility, in the face of that apocalypse to figure out what we're going to do. Global warming, for instance, weather patterns, fires, there are things being revealed to us about the shape of things to come. And what are we going to do to kind of shape that world to come, live into that world to come? It's a tremendous sense of, it's not a comfort necessarily, but it just means that things aren't going to end. And I think that that's an important thing for humans to realize, that the world is going to keep changing, and we need to keep changing with it in order to push it toward the kind of world that we want to create for ourselves.
Yeah, I just interviewed this woman who wrote The End of the Dinosaurs, and you have these 5 extinction events and looking at a 6th, and it's really cool because she talks about the day that it happens, and you're on the this impactor 6 point some miles in diameter hits the Yucatan Peninsula, and these T-Rexes are just kind of looking, and then all of a sudden they're gone. But the key, which reminds me of what you just said, is that life really wants to go on. It does not want to end. And she reminded me of, like, you're walking down the street and you see between 2 slabs of concrete, you see a little plant coming up,
right?
Or like bamboo, like shoving through concrete, or cockroaches or crocodiles.
That's the joke about the apocalypse, that cockroaches and rats will survive. There's some sort of life that tries to break through. I think that who knows? There certainly could be true extinction events, like a comet hitting the event that you were talking about that made the dinosaurs extinct. That is obviously an extremely catastrophic event. But the likelihood is that the things that happen, a terrible pandemic, a terrible war in Europe, the things that happen are things that we're going to adjust to, and we're going to find ways to live within that new reality. And again, the question is, as we keep moving into those new realities that we can't really even anticipate, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to shape the future into something better than what has come behind us? That's a difficult question for all of us.
Now if we drill down to the characters, there's an analogy I want to make, which is that here I'm an old white man. So you meet Jacob, Lauren, Swati, and Dominic, and I could look at them like, oh, they're just slackers. They got these majors in history and English literature and classics, and they live at home with their parents in the basement, and they work at Starbucks, and that's where they're at, and have student debt. It's kind of their own apocalypse.
Yeah. That was where it started for me, the novel, actually. I kind of came toward all these themes with the apocalypse, but I started out just thinking about what life was like when I was in my 20s. Just graduated from college, had a lot of debt, as a lot of people who graduate from college do, but didn't yet have a lot of job prospects because, in your 20s, you're just starting out. The jobs you get might not be very good. There's kind of this catch-22 that one of the characters even comments on, where you need experience in order to get a job, but if you don't get a job, you can't get experience. That's a very difficult place in life to be in. It's hard to get started as an adult in life with a career. And, thinking about my own this part of my own life. I'm older now. I'm in my late 30s, so I'm fairly well established now. But thinking about my own sort of rocky entry into adulthood, I remember thinking back on all the messages that I had received about following my bliss and going after my dreams and stuff like that, which is good advice, but also it's not always very practical. It does lead you into, it can lead you into situations where for a time you're not going to be very employable, or you're struggling to find a job. And that felt to me like a personal apocalypse on some level, because what I had been led to believe about the world, that it would receive me and my dreams with open arms, did not turn out to be quite the reality. But the other thing that was true of me in my 20s, as I was starting to, get started in a career and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, not making very much money, trying to make student loan payments, is that I was looking at the world around me, and the feeling of sort of personal apocalypse that I had did feel like it was reflected. It did feel like it was reflected in the world around me. In other words, as a young person who doesn't yet have much invested necessarily in the way things are, I could not help but look around me and see all the ways that the world seemed to be ending. And there were like very personal reasons for that. Ultimately I was depressed. That has a lot to do with it. But I think that there's maybe a kernel of truth there, that the folks who are just coming up, they don't have much invested in, I don't know, the capitalist system or in the way things are done. They are the ones who tend to see, young people are the ones who tend to see all the ways that the world as it is set up isn't really working and might be leading us to the end of the world, and who might see ways that they want to change it. This is reflected in different ways in each of the characters. I mean, the first character that I introduce is very much me in some ways when I was in my 20s. His name is Jacob. He was an English major in college. He wrote a senior thesis about Victorian detective fiction, which is actually pretty close to the topic of my master's thesis in English literature. So that's like a little Easter egg for people who know me. But he's struggling to get a job. He's living in his parents' basement. He thought that he was special. Turns out he's not, and he's pretty angry about it. And that's reflected both on a personal level, but it's also reflecting itself in how he's looking at the world. He's paranoid. He thinks that the world is ending. I mean, it turns out to kind of end in the first chapter. And he has some kind of weird ideas about corporations and conspiracy theories. And so his personal depression and his personal apocalypse is reflected in sort of a view of this broad world apocalypse. And that was kind of the original kernel that kind of led me into this book.
Hey, another one of my weird asides, on your website, how you have that picture of yourself and you joke about it?
Yeah.
It reminds me of you right now. Here we are talking and you have this blank brick wall behind you with
That's
the one.
right.
So it's the same juxtaposition as an auto parts store.
Well, I gotta say, so I mean, that picture, I'm sitting outside at a wine bar, but it's in a really small town, and the wine bar is right next to an auto parts store. So I've got a glass of wine, and it's auto shop in the back. It looks really funny. I am right now in an office. So I am, instead of taking my lunch break, I'm doing this right now. So here I am in a fairly empty office talking about an office novel. So that's the setting today.
See, there we go. It's art imitates life, or vice versa.
That's right.
Yeah, which reminds me of, we'll talk about all the characters, but Dominic is an interesting one because he's busting his ass. He wants to be something, and the way he gets hired is because the guy says, "Hey, you were at the last job fair."
Right.
And he keeps going to the same places, and I always tell people who say, "Well, how can I get a job because I practice law? How do I get a job?" I go, "Well, go out and walk around and go into each office you find, and sooner or later someone's going to be leaving and they're going to need somebody else." But that's the way you get it.
Absolutely. I think of all the characters, you know, some of them are sort of like failures to launch. They're slackers or whatever. They're struggling to get a job. He's the one who's working the hardest. Dominic is the one who's working the hardest and really like paying his dues. Um, and he does fail for a while. He fails to get his foot in the door. He finally does because he's just around. You know, they've just seen him enough times that they say, hey, we've got an open position. But even then, he only gets a temp position. But then, of course, the thing about getting the temp position, and he's a little bit bitter about it, the thing about the temp position is that it saves his life. Because if he'd gotten his full-time job, he would have been outside when all the bad stuff happened in chapter 1. So, and there too is like sort of a core irony that just appealed to me about this premise when it kind of popped into my head. You know, the temps, the people who are most disposable in the economy, and young people increasingly in the professional world are dealing with a gig economy where it's not permanent, it's contract, it's temp. The most disposable people are the ones who ultimately are saved and kind of standing in the wreckage of the world that they've inherited. So that was something that appealed to me. But I do really like Dominic a lot, just because, you know, he is working really hard. He's busting his butt, and he's clearly, I think he's talented. He's like a leadership type of guy. That's kind of the role that he fulfills in the story.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when he first meets Brent,
Mm-hmm.
it's like he doesn't want to cede his whatever power he perceives he has to this guy right away.
Yeah.
And but then, I thought Brent kind of gave up too easily because it reminded me a lot of the Lord of the Flies,
Sure.
And I thought, well, Brent wouldn't just lay
Wouldn't just
down.
give it up.
Yeah, but I
Yeah,
wasn't. Go ahead.
that's a good observation. I should think about that because I mean, what I wanted to get at there, not necessarily like thinking about it you know, consciously, but I very much wanted to capture, even though it's an apocalypse novel, you know, it's also an office novel, and I wanted to kind of capture the sort of petty rivalries and like passive aggressive like hostility that can crop up in any office environment where, you know, there's the hierarchy, but there's also the people that you're next to on the org chart, and sometimes, you know, you're looking at them as friends, sometimes you're looking at them as competition. And it was interesting to me to say that like the world ends, but those sort of like petty power driven dynamics of the office somehow stay. Like, and I don't know why they stay, if there's something just about the sort of like corporate environment that just makes people continue that, or if it's just human on some level, that they would just kind of continue to adopt those hierarchical, but also like jockeying for position types of attitudes.
Really good passive aggressive people are the most irritating people in the world. I would much rather have someone hit me in the face and be totally aggressive. I have this one guy I work with. Well, he's not going to listen to this anyway, but but he'll say things like, is that, are you, do you, would, is that what you think are you sure that's the best way to go?
Right.
Or like a woman saying, is that what you're going to wear tonight? That
right.
kind of.
And just tell me, in the example of, is that really the best way to go? Why don't you just tell me that's not the best way to go, if that's what you think, so I know what I'm dealing with. Or with Brent, he kind of like falls into, this is another character who, he and Dominic meet. This is another temp who has adopted some authority, and he's just kind of claimed it for himself, but nobody ever gave it to him. And so Dominic comes along, and there's a bit of a power struggle, but it's more of a passive one. And Brent never says, no, you cannot be involved in leadership. It's just me. I'm the dictator here. He's a little bit more passive, and when people push at him a little bit, he decides not to, exert his power to be the one and only. He ends up being part of a sort of triumvirate of leaders, 3 leaders there end up being, which is kind of like a if you think about it as a corporate structure, like a co-director or a C-suite type of setup where you've got your CEO and your CFO and your chief operations officer, those can be very complicated arrangements, where everybody has a little bit of power.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to, there's this guy I know has this company called Holacracy, and the idea is there's no hierarchy. The idea is everyone just suggests something, or they actually go ahead with their project without getting the okay. And then if it's good, it's good. And if it's not good, they don't get fired. It's just, okay, let's move on. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
I think that's maybe one of the things I wanted to consider here is, okay, the company's gone. All the regular employees have died. The corporate hierarchy has been totally wiped away. Now you've got a bunch of temps. They're all at the same level. They're making a life for themselves together. They're making a community, trying to survive. Is a flat structure possible? Or will there always be some sort of fighting for power? And it's hard for me to imagine that there's not some sort of jockeying for power, jockeying for position. And some people, like Jacob, for instance, we can go back to Jacob briefly. Jacob turns out doesn't want to lead. And when he meets Dominic, who seems like a natural leader, he says, oh, finally, someone to lead and take the pressure off of me. So it is interesting that you get those dynamics.
It's funny, we haven't talked about it, but again, because I have a bookstore, and I say this in every interview, people come into the bookstore, your book's going to be on the front table. You can hold it up or I'll hold it up, but here's the cover. And so the word temp is a word describing what you do, but it also is somewhat stigmatized, right?
It is.
And the title gives you that. Plus also, again, because they judge books by the cover is really cool because, it gives you it kind of gives you a dystopian kind of viewpoint, but you're not quite sure who those guys are and why they're doing that. And it's funny.
It's certainly flashy. It's a flashy cover, bright, right? Yeah.
Hey, did you design it or did you vet it or what happened?
Turner, Keylight, my publisher, hired a designer who read the whole book, which I think is great. She read the whole thing, and then presented us with, I think it was around 10 concepts. And that was one that was just among them. I don't think we had to do any variation on it. A lot of them were great, but that one just rose to the top. And they did give me feedback on it, which was really nice. To come back to your comment on the word temp being sort of pejorative in some level, I think that's absolutely true. And I do notice that temporary workers might still be referred to as temps, sort of colloquially, like just in conversation. But companies often refer to them as contract employees rather than temps, because I think that it is less pejorative, even if like in conversation, they might say, oh, that's the temp. But kind of buried in the contractor, obviously you need to renew your contract and the contract might get renewed. So, it is temporary. But buried right into the word temp is the notion that this person is not going to be around for very long. So it really is kind of a cruel word in some ways to refer to someone as a temp, in your office. There's the permanent people and the temps, and that's a tough thing. I know temps, I know people who have worked contract in some of the large corporations here where I am in Minneapolis, for instance, Target. And a detail from the book that is true, at least was true when I knew temps who worked at Target, is that they have different color badges. So not only are you called a temp or a contract employee, but you show that status by the security badge that you carry around, and anybody can look at you and say, oh, they're not a full employee, they're a temporary employee. So there's a bit of a stratification that you just have to have on you at all times.
Well, yeah. So like in the first part of the book, well, the first chapter, really, we've talked about Dominic a little bit, who we both kind of agree is the most motivated. Let's talk about the other three. I mean, there's tons of great characters, but let's talk about the other three we meet initially, Lauren, and you talked a little bit about Jacob, and then Swati. Swati's the most interesting one. Her reaction to what happens is like, I'm going, she would never. And then I thought, well, no, maybe she would. You know what I mean?
So Swati is a yoga instructor, and she's a fitness instructor. She studied in school business administration and I think athletics or something like that. I can't remember what I name it in the book, but she wants to open her ambition in life is to open her own yoga studio and mindfulness studio. So she's very oriented toward the human person and wellness and wholeness and feeling at peace with yourself and the world and with your body. So, you know, on some level, you know, I just wanted to do things that felt a little bit absurd. So like when they first meet Swati, she is trying to, you know, the apocalypse is happening outside. And because she is a, you know, wellness oriented person, she's trying to chill out. You know, she's freaking out and she's trying to calm down. And the way that she knows best how to do that, sort of the tool that she has for herself, you know, we might close our eyes and count to 10 or whatever. She's like doing yoga and she's sitting and basically meditating, you know, breathing calmly. On some level, you know, that was sort of absurd, but as I thought about it more, you know, if you're stuck in a building and something terrible is happening outside and you can't really do anything, what is there to do? Lauren and Jacob, they go watch TV because they want to see it on the news. On some level, you know, doing some exercises and trying to do some deep breathing stuff seems just as logical to me as watching TV and checking Twitter or whatever. So I really came to like Swati quite a bit because I think that she's the most centered in some ways of these folks. She's always thinking about what do people need and what do I need in order to thrive, even in this sort of, you know, outlandish and scary situation. I'm not sure if that's how you see her, but
Well, I didn't at first. I thought this is ridiculous. And then I thought of, you know, when I saw the Dalai Lama and my brother being a Buddhist, I thought, well, this is exactly how they would respond.
sure.
And the Buddhist sense would be, okay, you can respond this way. If you don't, it's okay. If you
Right.
do, you know, there's nothing, if you don't say I should meditate, you either meditate or you don't, you know.
We don't.
Yeah.
And maybe realizing that they have no power over what happens.
Exactly.
But they do have power over their own breath, their own reaction. I do think, and I kind of this is sort of made reference to in one of Swati's sort of narrative sections. It's unclear even to me whether she was doing something really, like she was being really centered, or whether she was sort of dissociating and having a trauma and shock reaction. I mean, that's kind of like a question that's left up to the reader. The bottom line is that these characters are dealing with like extreme trauma and shock. And I mean, now I'm thinking about some of the videos that I see out of Ukraine, a classical pianist fleeing her house and pausing at the piano in a totally broken down house, blown out windows to play some Chopin. What an amazing thing to do that's illogical and yet perfectly logical. I don't know. The human reaction to extreme catastrophe is a strange thing.
Yeah, and the thing about being a good writer is that you create these questions in the reader's mind, which is the reason why I have book clubs, and which I call fight clubs.
Oh yeah.
Because like, okay, Swati, she's in this toxic relationship in this toxic atmosphere, and I know that apartment. I know because I lived in it.
Me too.
Especially the drain in the shower is
it's
the one that gets you the worst. But I'm thinking, well, she's smart, she's centered. Why doesn't she just get out of there and leave? And then I thought, wait a minute, would I?
Sure.
It's like, you know, if you're scared of doing something, no matter how trivial it is, you're not going to do it. You know, someone else is going to say, well, why don't you? Oh yeah. It's like when you're depressed and someone says to you, why can't you just be happy?
Just be happy. Can't you just get it together? I mean, it's so funny that you call book clubs fight clubs. Not that they're always hostile necessarily, but you know, it's just people kind of saying, this is my reaction. Well, my reaction was totally different. I mean, that's half the discussion, I think, in book clubs, and it's a lot
Well,
of fun.
when the book really comes alive, it's like, why didn't she do this? Like
Right.
she's a real person.
Right.
And that's what's great about it, is when you get to that point, and this book does get to that point because there's so many good characters. That's the other thing. I could put this in the bookstore in science fiction. I could put it in thrillers, or
Sure.
it's even like your first book. It's young adult, but you don't have to put it in young adult.
No. Some people have been referring to it as a locked room mystery, which I didn't think about when I was writing it, but it makes some sense. There's definitely a mystery, and that's hard to talk about without getting into spoilers, but there's definitely a mystery element of like, what happened, what does the company do, and that's kind of, that comes out slowly throughout the course of the book.
And the other thing is, you think, okay, it's science fiction, and then you go, wait a minute, there's this app called Concierge, and I'm going, well, that's not science fiction, because basically it's happening in a couple of years. It already is happening.
For sure.
Talk a little bit about Concierge and how it works, and how it's not, I don't want to spoil it. I'm not going to say anything else about it, but anyway, go ahead.
I will say, what's revealed, because there are some revelations about Concierge in the first few chapters that I can certainly talk about. Concierge is an app that it's basically a lifestyle coach. It's a life coach or a personal assistant, but it's a very intelligent one. It's like if Siri knew exactly who you were and knew exactly what you should do in every situation in life, and was really spying on you all the time. So you download the app, and it takes you through a lot of really strange personal questions, which turns out to be sort of a bizarre personality inventory. And based upon your personality inventory, and just the things you do in your everyday life, presumably the app is tracking you, it's tracking where you're going, it's tracking what you're doing, it might be tracking your purchases. It just kind of tells you what to do. So one of the characters, Lauren, she goes into it looking for a job, and it tells her about a job that she might be good at and that she would actually like. It kind of reads her personality and matches it with careers that are out there, and it guides her in the right direction. Turns out that the app also tracks Swati's biometrics, her heart rate, probably like her her like skin temperature or her rate of breathing. And sometimes it says, hey, Swati, you should take a break because you seem a little stressed, and do some meditation. And then at some point, it turns out that Jacob used it as well. I mean, this isn't getting too many spoilers, but and it tells him what bus routes to take. It tells him, the best driving routes to take. It tells him social events to go to. It's a dating assistant. Like, it's just an app. It's a sort of app that I made up in my head, but it seems like it could be real because I feel like technology is getting just that intrusive where it is watching us all the time, but also because I found something kind of not comforting about this idea necessarily, because it is scary, but there is something borderline comforting about the idea of just giving your life over. Life has so many decisions. There's so many decisions, and I don't know if you struggle with them, but I sometimes do. Just giving your life over to an all-seeing, all-knowing artificial intelligence that can just tell you what to do to lead you to a happy life. I think that it would be scary, but that a lot of people would actually download it because being relieved of those decisions is something that would be appealing to a lot of people.
That's what I always thought about fundamental Christians. I mean, I would love to be a fundamental Christian, because once you have faith, everything's fine. And it'd be nice to have a personal relationship with Jesus, because it would be like having a personal valet.
Sure.
Everything's,
absolutely.
I know. So, when ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. But yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. But to move on, so everyone's going to ask you this, so I'll ask it to you. So Tristan Brandt, they're all going to say, well, is that supposed to be Elon Musk? Is that supposed to be Steve Jobs? It's obviously not Bill Gates, and it's obviously not Tim Cook.
Sure.
But so, yeah, so who is he? Where did you
Well,
draw from?
he's kind of all of them and none of them. I was definitely very much thinking of the guru CEO, um, who is not just a CEO. I mean, like, I don't want to overblow them. Like, you know, not just a businessman, but also starts to think that he is a sort of philosopher of human human behavior and like society and stuff like that. Because I think that this is something that happens. You know, Elon Musk seems to be thinking large thoughts about what he thinks the future of the human civilization should be, and that has to do with neural implants and, you know, underground uh, buildings and societies and space travel. And that's kind of scary, you know, for him to have that much power. You know, he's a billionaire who's also thinking about actually engineering the human future. Bezos, I'm not sure how much he's thinking about engineering the human future, but he does want to go to space. That might just be like a fun thing that he wants to do. Another one that I thought of, so I mean, Elon Musk is probably the strongest with a little bit of Jeff Bezos thrown in. Another one that I thought of who's maybe less known, name is less bandied about, is Peter Thiel,
Oh, yeah,
who the
yeah.
reason that I thought about him is because he strikes me as kind of mysterious. You know, I don't always know what he's up to, but every so often I'll hear about, you know, Peter Thiel wrote a manifesto about how he thinks that democracy is actually the enemy of freedom. Peter Thiel is making a plan for ultra rich people to start their own libertarian society on an island that he's building. You know, like it's kind of rooted in kind of that like mysterious but also rumor driven, like what are the billionaires doing thing. He's kind of a creation of both of real billionaires and tech CEOs, but also about the rumors and the fears about them and what they're up to, and actually how they're trying to engineer the future of the human race.
I never would have thought of Peter Thiel, but I hate Peter Thiel.
Yeah, he's scary.
Yeah, the
Not a
other one,
fan.
yeah, Jeff Bezos, you know, the idea of his cowboy hat and buffing up and flying in a rocket that looks exactly like a penis. It even has a
I
glands.
know.
I mean,
Yeah,
seriously, didn't
it's
they look
bizarre.
at and you know, the cowboy hat and then having someone fix the crotch of his pants? No, Musk doesn't do any of that stuff.
No, him and Bezos and Richard Branson, they're like space ambitions. It all just seems to be like cowboy masculinity. They're just like old guys having fun. But Musk seems to have some sort of a vision of the human future and how it's dependent upon space colonization or going to Mars. And you know, nobody elected him to engineer our future. That's kind of what I'm thinking about with Brandt, I think. You know, corporations are so powerful. In some ways, the largest corporations that we have are more powerful. They have more influence on our day-to-day lives than governments do, than the American government, in some ways. And that means that the CEOs of them are very powerful, unelected officials. And they're even doing things that elected officials used to do, like going to space. You know, in the 60s, that was something that we did together. It was something that JFK said, we choose to go to the moon. And then it was something that we did together as a society. Now these big things about, you know, the human future are things that are being pursued by really rich guys as kind of a hobby for some of them, or they're actually trying to do something to change the way that society is shaped. And that's something at least worth considering if we like that or not.
Yeah, I know. The last thing I'll say, and because it's just me again, is that, okay, Elon Musk has done more than NASA has done in 75 years, you know,
True.
landing rockets on the ground and reusing them. Whereas Jeff Bezos, his flights are lower than Alan Shepard's, they're slower than Alan Shepard's, and they're shorter than Alan Shepard's, which occurred like in 1962.
I know, it's really bizarre that we're so impressed with this. because we did, you know, all the things we did together in the 50s and 60s is more than what some of these guys are doing, Elon Musk aside. But, you know, you got to cover it or whatever. So,
Well, going back to the book, because we're trying to sell the book. So go as far as you can about, so the four characters we've spoken about, Jacob, Lauren to a certain extent, Swati, Dominic. You think a reader might think, okay, this is going to be the story of them.
mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden something changes.
Yeah.
And you can talk a little bit about that. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I can talk about it in a fairly general way. I'm definitely okay. I wanted to make sure that, you know, this is a book of, there's a lot of ideas in this book, but it also functions dramatically. And for drama, you know, plot, I want to make sure that the books that I'm writing are worlds that have consequences, you know, the things that you do, the things that the characters do, the choices that they make have consequences. That means that you have to be willing to potentially let someone die, or disappear, or, you know, and I'm not going to say any more than that, but I very much thought, you know, I just kind of thought about the world that I'd created, about what was going to be revealed, about like all the various power structures. And I just knew that the things that my four main characters were up to, there would be consequences for at least one of them, and maybe more than one of them. And if you start to kind of like protect your characters from the natural consequences of the actions that they take in the world that you've set up, then you're kind of cheating. And not only are you cheating, but you're sort of draining the narrative of stakes and suspense. Because, you know, I think about like sitcoms or something. No matter what, with a sitcom, like an old sitcom, you know that no matter what happens in that episode, things are going to go back to baseline at the end of the next episode. But we're not dealing with sitcoms. We're dealing with like things keep changing. And so that's kind of what I wanted to make sure happened, that the actions that the four main characters and eventually more characters take in the confines of this world that I've set up actually had consequences for them and for others. And hopefully that's something that I deliver on. But yeah, there is a pretty big consequence, and actually a few of them that happen, you know, midway through the book all the way through the end. Some dominoes start to fall.
At the risk of getting you mad, I would say the one thing reminded me of what happened to Ned Stark. And,
yep, I thought about that a lot. And
really?
I mean, not a lot, but definitely George R.R. Martin with setting up, I think he very deliberately in the first book or in the first season, you know, depending on if you watched or read it, set up Ned Stark as a main character. And then very deliberately, I guess, spoiler alert, if you know, this would be the time to skip ahead if you don't know Game of Thrones. And then very deliberately said, okay, now this main character is going to die. And the impact of that to the reader was suddenly realizing that nobody was safe. You know, it's like Star Wars if George Lucas had killed off Luke Skywalker. Like, we kind of know, you know, through the first trilogy at least, that like Luke Skywalker is going to be okay because he's one of the main characters, but that's just not what George R.R. Martin wanted to do. And I really respect that. It's a way to kind of pull the rug out from the reader and just let them know that like, this is a really suspenseful world. This is a world with real stakes. Anybody can die. Even the people that you have been trained to think are just going to survive because they're part of the main cast.
Yeah, there's two things about what you do with this. What you do is that, one, it's totally unexpected, which authors don't usually do that. And that Game of Thrones did that over and over again from the very beginning, from the Golden Crown. You know, it's like, about what you do, Yeah, that's how I'll phrase this. So yeah, something happens, and then you give the reader hope that it didn't
It
happen.
didn't happen.
And I
Well, because
thought, oh,
there's so
yeah,
much question here about what's real. Another thing that I thought about, I mean, so obviously Game of Thrones is in there as like as a reference for you know, what I do with plot in some respects. Another one I thought about, and I'm not sure if you've ever watched this TV show, is Lost, which, you know, in hindsight, they were just making things up as they went along. Don't totally love it, but there were always very real questions in Lost about what's really happening and what's really real. You know, is someone behind the scenes pulling the strings? And you're right, there is, like, almost right until the end, there's a very real sense that the things that have happened might be engineered, they might be fake, or they might be real. So that's part of the suspense as well, is actually finding out what's true and what's false at the end.
yeah, and it's now that I think about it, it's very cinematic. You know, it's like a combination of it's like The Expanse, kind of.
Sure.
There's, but you know, you need to option it to Netflix for a series.
Well,
They would.
it's been optioned. It hasn't found a home yet. I mean, it's been optioned by a production company, and they're, I think, seeking deals. I don't know. They may well be in touch with Netflix. I'm not sure, because that's kind of all gone behind a curtain where I'm no longer sure what happens.
Right.
But certainly a lot of people have read it and said this would make a great series. This would make a great movie, because it very much feels like the kind of series or movie that's being made right now, where there's a central mystery, there's a cast of characters. I would love it, obviously, if that were to happen. That'd be really exciting.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the first episode. You know, I can draw it in my head,
Me too.
and you know, and then the relationships, like, or the romance, the initial romance that really catches you off guard too, because it
Sure.
just happens.
Right.
But these things do happen. And then, yeah, so in the first episode, which they would composite, yeah, you'd have the romance, you'd have the initial looking out the window, and then searching through the drawers, which is a lot of fun. Um, yeah, it's pretty cool.
A nice mix of horror and comedy, maybe, if you give it to a talented writer. I think it would be a lot of fun. So we'll see. Maybe someday it'll be out there as a TV show or something.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a good possibility that it will be, and I think it would be very popular. And like I said, I think the first episode would just suck you in, because you,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, it
Okay,
starts off
well,
with a bang. I mean, like the big catastrophe kind of happens right away. So.
yeah, it's all kind of flipped around. Like, from people leaving who you thought would be there the whole time to something happening at the beginning, where there's this one interview I just did where the first line was something like, I helped my sister kill somebody.
Oof, that's a good one.
Yeah. And so that's, you know, the lead was given away in the first line, but it made for the book. Yeah.
You got to keep reading after that, right?
Yeah, you couldn't help it.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, so that's a good way to end. We've pretty much gone through as much as we could go through.
Right.
And all I can say is I really recommend this book. Like I say often, when I really enjoy a book, it's going to be on the front table and in the window. And so Andrew, thank you so much. The book is The Temps, released, I guess, tomorrow.
Yep.
Yeah, tomorrow. So good luck with that. I think you'll have a lot of fun. I saw some of your events coming up, and I really wish you the best. And then I'm going to go back and read the first book now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here, and this was a lot of fun.
Likewise, I agree. Okay, take it easy.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.